Have you ever stopped to think that maybe you're making the same financial mistake every single month without even realizing it? What if I told you there's a behavioral pattern so subtle, so seemingly harmless, that you don't even register it as a problem, but it's silently destroying any real chance you have of building wealth? What you're about to discover in the next few minutes might be uncomfortable, might make you look at your financial choices in a completely different way, might even generate that uncomfortable feeling of recognition when you realize you've been doing exactly this month after month, year after year. But if you have the courage to face this truth and apply what I'm going to share here, you'll finally understand why no matter how much you earn, the result always seems the same. And more importantly, you'll know exactly how to interrupt this destructive cycle before it consumes more years of your financial life. I'm going to show you not only what this mistake is that keeps repeating silently, but mainly why it's so incredibly hard to notice and what's the exact point where you need to intervene to break this pattern once and for all. So tell me something. Are you ready to confront the mistake that might be sabotaging your financial life every month without you noticing? There's a scene that repeats itself millions of times every month, in every city, in every social class. And it always starts the same way. Money hits your account, whether it's salary, project payment, business income, whatever the source, that amount enters your bank account. And for a brief moment, just a fleeting moment, you feel relief. You feel like everything's under control, that you have resources, that you can handle your responsibilities. It's like a pressure you didn't even know you were carrying. Suddenly eases up, you breathe a little easier. You look at the balance and think, okay, now I can pay this, do that, solve that other problem. And in that moment, everything seems to be on track. Everything seems possible. You feel like you have margin, that you have control, that you can manage your financial life. But then, and this is where the story gets interesting, then the decisions start happening. Small decisions that seem completely reasonable, completely justifiable, completely harmless. You see something you want. Could be clothes, a gadget, dinner at a nice restaurant, a subscription to some service, anything. And you think, I deserve this. I worked hard this month, just this once. It's not that expensive. I can give myself this small pleasure. And you buy it. And in the moment, it doesn't seem like a big deal. It's $50 here, $100 there, $200 over there. Amounts that individually don't seem threatening, don't seem like they'll compromise your situation. So you authorize it, you allow it, you justify it, and move on thinking everything's fine, that you still have control, that this won't make a difference in the end. And then comes another expense, another small decision, another quick justification. Oh, but I really need this. This will make my life easier. This is an investment, and you spend again and again and again, and each individual decision seems to make sense. Each isolated expense seems reasonable. But what you don't realize, what becomes invisible in this process, is the cumulative effect. It's how these small leaks add up, how they compromise your budget, how they reduce your room to maneuver, and before you know it, before you can process what happened, 2-3 weeks have passed, and when you look at your account again, the money's gone. It's already committed. It's already allocated. It's no longer available. And then comes that feeling of, what? Where did it all go? You try to mentally reconstruct where you spent it, try to remember each decision, but it's all kind of hazy, kind of fuzzy. You remember some of the bigger expenses, but the small ones got lost, got mixed up. And you're left with that disconcerting impression that the money simply evaporated, simply disappeared without leaving much trace, without producing much noticeable value in your life. And then the end of the month arrives, and reality comes back with full force, the fixed bills you can't avoid, rent or the house payment, utility bills, the financial commitments you made. All of this comes back to pressure you, and suddenly, that relief from the beginning of the month seems like a distant memory, seems like something that happened in another life. And you're back to the pressure, back to the feeling of tightness, back to that anguish of making the numbers work, of fitting the pieces together, of figuring out where you're going to get money to cover what's missing. And you look at the situation and think, but how? I got paid at the beginning of the month. I had money. What happened? And worse than the lack of money itself is the feeling that nothing has changed. It's realizing that you're exactly in the same place you were last month and the month before that and last year. It's the feeling of running hard but staying still, of trying hard but not progressing, of making effort but not succeeding. And this is frustrating. This is discouraging. This makes you question your ability, your intelligence, your worth. But here's what you need to understand. And this is absolutely fundamental. This cycle doesn't happen because of lack of intelligence. It doesn't happen because you're dumb, incompetent, or irresponsible. It's not a character flaw. It's not a moral deficiency. This cycle happens because of automatic behavioral patterns. It happens because you've been conditioned to act in certain ways, to make certain types of decisions, to respond to certain emotional triggers, and these patterns operate on autopilot. They operate without you needing to think consciously about them. They operate so naturally that you don't even realize you're following a script. You think you're making free choices, conscious choices, but actually you're just repeating a program that was installed in you over the years, through your education, your culture, your experiences, the messages you absorbed about money, about deserving, about pleasure, about reward. And as long as you don't identify this program, as long as you don't make conscious what's unconscious, you'll keep repeating the same pattern. You'll keep getting the same results. You'll stay trapped in the same cycle, month after month, year after year. So let's dissect this pattern. Let's understand exactly how it works. What are the psychological mechanisms that sustain it? Because when you see clearly the mechanics of a trap, it becomes much easier to escape from it. And the first thing you need to understand is the concept of in-the-moment decisions versus strategic planning. Most people operate financially by making in-the-moment decisions, meaning they decide what to do with money at the moment the money is available, at the moment they see something they want, at the moment a desire or perceived need arises. And the problem with in-the-moment decisions is that they're highly influenced by your emotional state in that moment, by your energy, by your mood, by the immediate context. If you're happy, you tend to spend more. If you're sad, you might spend to console yourself. If you're stressed, you might spend to relieve tension. If you're bored, you might spend to get some excitement. Each emotional state has an associated spending pattern, and when you make in-the-moment decisions, you're at the mercy of these emotional states. You're reacting to your feelings instead of acting based on a rational plan. Now, contrast that with strategic planning, which is when you decide in advance, when you're in a neutral, calm, rational mental state, what you're going to do with your money. How much you'll allocate to each category, what your priorities are, what really matters, and then you simply execute that plan, regardless of how you're feeling in the moment, regardless of the impulses that arise. You've already made the important decisions when you were in your best mental state, so now you just need to follow through, and this completely changes the dynamic. This takes you out of the position of reacting emotionally and puts you in the position of executing strategically. But most people don't do this. Most don't have a plan. So they're at the mercy of impulses, emotional states, circumstances of the moment, and then money slips through their fingers without them realizing how or why. The second psychological mechanism that sustains this pattern is present bias, which is the human tendency to overvalue immediate gratification and undervalue future consequences. Your brain is programmed to prefer pleasure now instead of benefit later. It's an evolutionary inheritance from when there was no guarantee of a future, when it made sense to consume resources immediately because you might not be alive tomorrow to enjoy them. But we don't live in that context anymore. Today, the future is relatively predictable. Today, delaying gratification can generate enormous compound benefits. But your brain still operates with that old programming. So when you see something you want, the part of your brain that screams, "Buy it now, it'll give you pleasure now," is much louder, much more urgent, much more convincing than the quiet part that says, "But wait, if you save this money, invest it. In a few years, you'll have much more." The voice of immediate gratification always wins because it's emotional, visceral, urgent, while the voice of future reward is rational, calm, distant, and emotion beats reason almost always. Unless you develop specific strategies to work around this bias, to give voice and power to the long-term perspective. The third mechanism is what I call death by 1,000 cuts, which is the idea that small expenses don't register as significant in your brain. Your brain has a perception threshold. Expenses below that threshold simply don't trigger alarms, Don't make you stop and think, wait, this is a significant expense. I should consider this carefully. So you spend $10 here, 20 there, 30 over there, and each of these expenses flies under the radar. Your brain doesn't register them as threats to your budget, but when you add it all up at the end of the month, these small, insignificant expenses have turned into hundreds or even thousands of dollars. And then you're shocked. You think, how is this possible? I didn't spend that much. But you did. It was just distributed across so many small transactions that none individually seemed big enough to trigger your internal alarm, so you allowed all of them. And the cumulative effect was devastating, but because it happened in a distributed way, in a gradual way, you didn't notice until it was too late. The fourth mechanism is automatic justification, which is the surprising ability your brain has to create seemingly logical reasons to justify decisions that are actually purely emotional. You see something you want. The emotional part of your brain has already decided it wants that, and instantly, in milliseconds, the rational part kicks in. Not to question the decision, but to justify it, to create a narrative that makes the decision seem sensible, responsible, necessary. So you tell yourself, oh, but I really need this. This will help me at work. This is basically an investment. This will last years, so it's actually economical in the long run. And you believe these justifications. You really believe you're being rational, that you're making a thoughtful decision. But actually, you're just rationalizing an emotional impulse. And your brain is so good at this, so fast, so convincing, that you don't even realize you're being fooled by yourself. You don't even realize that the decision was already made emotionally and the logic came after just to make you feel good about it. The fifth mechanism, and this one is particularly treacherous, is what I call financial amnesia, which is the tendency to quickly forget your expenses, especially the small ones. You buy something, feel that little hit of dopamine from the purchase, and then your brain simply files that information away, doesn't keep it active, doesn't keep reminding you that you spent. So when you go to evaluate your financial situation, when you try to understand where your money went, you simply don't remember most of the small expenses. They've disappeared from your active memory, and you're left with the impression that money mysteriously evaporated, that you didn't spend that much, that something's wrong, but nothing's wrong. You just forgot. Your brain wasn't designed to maintain detailed records of all financial transactions. It was designed to focus on the present, on what's urgent, on what's emotionally salient, so small expenses from the recent past simply disappear, and you're left without reliable data about your own financial behavior. Now, with all these mechanisms operating simultaneously, in-the-moment decisions, present bias, death by 1,000 cuts, automatic justification, financial amnesia, you have a perfect storm. You have a combination of factors that practically guarantees you'll spend more than you should on things less important than you should, without realizing you're doing it. And you'll be surprised at the end of the month when the money's gone and you don't know exactly how. And then the cycle starts again. New month, new deposit, new momentary relief, new in-the-moment decisions, new small expenses, new justifications, new forgetting. And at the end of the month, same unpleasant surprise, same pressure, same frustration, and this repeats month after month, year after year. And while this is happening, you're not building wealth, you're not accumulating assets, you're not progressing financially, you're just surviving. Just keeping your head above water, just going from one month to the next without ever really advancing. And here's the most frustrating part. This has nothing to do with how much you earn. You could be making $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 a month. The pattern is the same. Because the pattern isn't about quantity of money. It's about behavior. It's about how you deal with the money you have. It's about the psychological mechanisms that govern your decisions, and these mechanisms operate the same way regardless of your income. Of course, someone who earns more, has more margin for error, can waste more before feeling the pressure. But in the end, if the behavior is the same, the result is the same, which is ending the month with no surplus, no accumulation, no progress. Because the natural tendency, when there's no awareness and strategy, is for expenses to expand to fill available income. It's the famous Parkinson's law applied to personal finances. Your expenses will grow to consume all your income unless you consciously impose limits, unless you have systems in place to prevent this, and most people don't, so no matter how much they earn, they always end up in the same place at the end of the month. So what to do? How to break this pattern? How to interrupt this cycle before it completely destroys your financial evolution? First, you need to bring all of this to the conscious level. You need to stop operating on autopilot and start operating with full awareness, and this means tracking, means measuring, means knowing exactly where every cent of your money is going, because you can't manage what you don't measure, you can't control what you don't see. So the first step, absolutely non-negotiable, is to start recording absolutely all your expenses, every coffee, every snack, every impulse purchase, every subscription, every outing, everything. And I'm not talking about doing this in your head or from memory. I'm talking about a physical record, whether in an app, a spreadsheet, a notebook, but something concrete, something you can look at and see the objective reality of your financial behavior. Because when you do this, when you start seeing the numbers in black and white, suddenly those small, invisible expenses become visible. That financial amnesia is cured by the external record, and you gain real awareness, objective awareness of what's happening, and just this awareness alone changes the game. Because now you see, you can no longer pretend it's not happening, can no longer be surprised at the end of the month. You have the data, you have the naked truth about your behavior. Second, you need to implement what I call zero-based budgeting, which is a system where every dollar that comes in already has a predetermined destination before you spend anything. You sit down at the beginning of the month, look at how much you'll receive, and allocate every dollar to a specific category. So much for housing, so much for food, so much for transportation, so much for entertainment, so much for investment, so much for emergencies. Each category has a clear limit, and the sum of all limits equals your income. Zero is left unallocated, hence the name zero-based budget. And now, when an impulse to buy arises, when that automatic justification appears, you don't ask, "Can I afford this?" You ask, "Does this fit within the category I already planned? Do I still have budget in this category? Is this more important than other things I could do with this money from the same category?" And suddenly, you're no longer making isolated in-the-moment decisions. You're making decisions within a strategic framework, within a plan you created when you were in your best mental state. And this completely changes the dynamic. This gives you control. This takes you out of the position of reacting and puts you in the position of executing a plan. Third, you need to automate your priorities. And priority number one, if you want to build wealth, if you want to get out of this cycle, is to pay yourself first, is to separate a percentage of your income for investment before doing anything else. And when I say automate, I mean literally set up an automatic transfer that happens the same day money enters your account. Before you have a chance to spend it, before you have a chance to justify why you need all of it this month, the money's already gone, already went to an investment account, already working for your future, and now you live with what's left. And this forces you to adapt, forces you to adjust your spending to what remains, and it works. It works much better than the traditional approach of, "I'll spend on what I need and invest what's left." Because with that approach, there's never anything left. There's always something else. Another justification, another perceived need. But when you take it out first, when you automate, you remove the decision, you remove the opportunity for self-sabotage, and you guarantee that you're progressing, that you're accumulating, that you're building wealth, no matter what else happens during the month. Fourth, you need to create friction for impulsive spending. You need to make the act of spending harder, because the easier it is to spend, the more you'll spend. It's that simple, so practical things. Take credit cards out of your wallet, leave them at home, leave them somewhere that takes effort to access, uninstall shopping apps from your phone, cancel saved payment data on websites, unsubscribe from promotional email lists. Each small barrier you place between the impulse and the completion of the purchase is an opportunity for reason to kick in. It's a moment of pause where you can question, do I really need this? Is this aligned with my goals? Is this worth the opportunity cost? And many times, when you create this pause, when you break the automatic flow from impulse to purchase, you realize that no, that actually you don't need it, that it was just a momentary impulse, that it will pass, and you avoid the expense, and the money stays where it should be, working for your real goals instead of being wasted on momentary gratifications that leave nothing lasting. Fifth, and perhaps the most important of all, you need to reconnect with your why. You need to have absolute clarity about why you want to change your financial situation, what you're building, what the vision is, what the bigger goal is. Because if you don't have a strong why, if you don't have a powerful emotional reason to do things differently, you won't be able to resist impulses. You won't be able to maintain discipline. You'll go back to old patterns. Because old patterns are comfortable, they're automatic, they're easy. It requires zero effort to follow the pattern you've always followed, but changing, doing differently, resisting impulses. This requires effort, requires discipline, requires willpower, and willpower is a limited resource. You only have so much willpower available. So if you're trying to change only with willpower without a strong why, you'll fail, you'll get tired, you'll give up. But if you have a powerful why, if you have a clear vision of what you're building, if you know exactly why you're making these sacrifices, then they're not sacrifices, they're investments. They're necessary steps towards something you deeply want. And then you find the motivation, you find the energy, you find the determination to continue even when it's hard, even when everyone around you is spending, even when you feel like giving in. Now, I know all this might seem like a lot, might seem difficult, might seem restrictive. You might be thinking, but I'll have to control every cent? Will I have to live like a miser? Where's the joy? Where's the pleasure? Where's living in the present? And I understand that resistance, but here's the truth. What I'm proposing isn't deprivation, isn't misery, isn't living counting pennies afraid to spend. What I'm proposing is awareness, is intentionality, is you being in control instead of being controlled by your impulses, is you spending in alignment with your real values and goals, instead of spending on autopilot on things that actually don't matter that much. When you live on autopilot, when you let unconscious patterns be in charge, you spend on thousands of little things that give you momentary pleasure but contribute nothing to your real happiness, to your deep satisfaction, to your life goals. You waste precious resources on things you won't even remember a week from now. But when you live with awareness, when you have clarity about what really matters, you can spend on those things. You can invest in experiences that really bring you joy, in objects that really add value to your life, in things that are aligned with who you want to be and what you want to build. And you do this without guilt, without anxiety, because you know it's within your plan, it's within your budget, it's aligned with your bigger strategy. The difference isn't spending versus not spending. The difference is spending consciously versus spending unconsciously. It's spending with purpose versus spending on automatic. It's spending on things that really matter versus wasting on things that don't matter. And when you make this shift, when you start operating with awareness and intentionality, something magical happens. Suddenly you realize you have more money available than you thought you had because you stopped wasting on 1,000 useless little things. You realize you can save, you can invest, you can progress without feeling like you're depriving yourself of anything important. Because you only cut the superfluous, only the waste, only what wasn't really serving you, and you kept or even increased spending on what really matters, on what really brings value, on what's really aligned with your goals and values. And here's something you need to understand deeply. The cost of continuing to repeat this mistake every month isn't just the money wasted in that specific month. The real cost is the compound opportunity cost over time. Each month you waste $500 on unconscious spending. You're not just losing those $500. You're losing the $500 plus all the growth those $500 would have generated if they'd been invested. You're losing years of compound interest. You're losing the possibility of that money working for you, multiplying, growing. So if you waste $500 a month for 10 years, you didn't lose $60,000, you potentially lost $100,000. $150,000, $200,000, depending on how you could have invested it. You lost a decade of wealth building, a decade of financial progress, a decade of opportunities, and this is devastating. This is the difference between reaching 60 years old with financial freedom or reaching 60 years old depending on continuing to work, depending on government retirement, depending on others, without options, without freedom, without choice. So when you look at that $20 expense that seems so small, so insignificant, remember you're not just spending $20, you're potentially giving up $100 in the future, all the multiplication those $20 would have generated. And when you see it that way, when you understand the real cost, suddenly that impulse purchase loses much of its appeal. Suddenly it doesn't seem so harmless anymore. Suddenly you realize you're making a choice between small gratification now or big possibility later. And with that awareness, you can make better choices, can opt for later, can invest in the future, can build something real instead of wasting on momentary pleasures that leave nothing lasting. And look, I'm not saying you should never give yourself pleasures, never enjoy the moment, never spend on things that bring you immediate joy. What I'm saying is that this needs to be a conscious choice, planned within a budget, within a strategy, not an automatic pattern that consumes all your resources without you noticing. You can and should have a category in your budget for pleasure, for fun, for small joys. And when you spend within that category, you spend without guilt, without anxiety, because you know it's planned for. It's within the plan. It's not compromising your bigger goals. But when you spend outside the plan, when you spend on automatic, when you spend without awareness, then yes, you're self-sabotaging, you're compromising your future, you're repeating the mistake that keeps you stuck in the same place month after month, year after year. So let me ask you a final question, and I want you to answer honestly, just to yourself. Do you really want to change your financial situation? Or do you just want it to magically change without you having to change your behavior? Because if you want real change, if you want different results, you need to be willing to do differently, to think differently, to act differently. You need to be willing to break automatic patterns, to question impulses, to create and follow a strategic plan, to live with awareness and intentionality. And this takes work. This requires effort. This demands discipline, at least in the beginning, until the new patterns become automatic, until the new habits take root. But if you do this work, if you have this discipline, if you implement these strategies, I guarantee you that in 6 months, in a year, you'll look back and won't believe the difference, won't believe how much you've accumulated, how much you've progressed, how your relationship with money has changed, how you feel more in control, more empowered, more confident, more free. And all of this because you had the courage to face the mistake you were repeating, to bring to consciousness what was unconscious, to break the pattern that was keeping you trapped. So the choice is yours. You can keep doing what you've always done and getting what you've always gotten, or you can start today, right now, doing differently, creating a plan, tracking your expenses, automating your investments, living with awareness, and finally, start building the financial life you deserve, that you want, that you're capable of having, but only if you choose, only if you act, only if you stop repeating the mistake and start doing what's right.